and let's discuss his fabulous work. Here he is, Massimo Mazzucco. Good morning to you. How are you, Massimo?
Good morning to you, Sonia, and good morning to everyone listening. Fine, thank you.
Wonderful to have you with us. You are, of course, a photographer. You're a filmmaker. You made an incredible movie. Documentary rather, about the fake moon landing. And when I went through the comments, because I thought this is actually so well put together, and I will put a link in the description at the end of the show, but I went through the comments and people were literally saying this is the best moon landing documentary that they've seen. Most comprehensive, the best one, forensic examination, on and on. And we are, of course, talking about the Apollo 11, the landing on the moon that we were told took place on July the 20th, 1969. I remember it now. I was 5 years old, and I remember the whole thing of Neil Armstrong stepping onto the surface, and that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The only problem is many of us now realize all of that was bunkum. And Massimo is here to talk through his incredible work. When I was going through your questions that you ask in tandem with the documentary yesterday, I said to you, I need to put you on at a later spot so we can have a little bit longer time with you, because it's so good, the detail that you go into. So, but first of all, tell me, why did this subject attract you?
Let me just take away 1 minute from you. I also made a documentary about marijuana, which is called The True History of Marijuana, which does confirm exactly what you've been saying all along. And especially it analyzes what happened in the 1930s when Big Pharma, the big pharmaceutical petrochemical complex, in fact, came into power, and they needed to kill the marijuana because otherwise they would have had absolutely no market for them. Anyway, that's a discussion for another time.
Maybe you can get involved in that show, because clearly from the responses in the comments, people are very interested in that discussion. It is a discussion that needs to be had. So thank you. I felt that there was more than just this that we would have in common. So yes, tell me, what interested you about, because some people are already saying, yeah, a movie was beamed at me in 1969. That was a movie, wasn't it?
You said you were 5 years old, right? When that happened. I was 15. I was actually on my birthday. I was born on July 20, 1954, 15 years before. Not only that, but on the very evening of the quote-unquote moon landing, I was on a beach, and I was watching the television sets, the black and white television sets at the local bar. All the crowd was around. And for the first time in my life, that night, I kissed a girl. So to me, that event was unique. I felt that the universe gave me that present of the moon landing for my 15th birthday, plus my first kiss. You know, that's how I saw the world then. And I grew up thinking, of course, that the moon landing had been the best thing that humankind has ever achieved until now. Then, unfortunately, I became a photographer, a fashion photographer. I started out by chance with a very famous photographer, one of the, I would say, the top 10 in the history of fashion photography. His name was Oliviero Toscani. He just passed away a few months ago. He was the one who made the famous campaign Colors of Benetton all around the world.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yes.
Right.
I started working for him. I worked for 3 years as an assistant. I learned the trade, and then I went off on my own and had my career. And when in the 2000 or 2001, when NASA published all their pictures of all the missions, all of them, 6,000 shots on the website, on their website, I started looking at them, and I started seeing how the same problems and the same defects that I would experience when I, as a photographer, tried to replicate the sunlight in the studio were also there in their pictures. Actually, you have a picture down there. I guess everybody can see it because it's on the screen, right? Right above "Wake Up," everybody sees that.
Yep.
Okay. When you have to fake a situation, a sunlight in the studio, say you want to go to the Bahamas and shoot bathing suits, but you don't have the money to go to the Bahamas, and the magazine will say, "Can we do it in the studio?" And you say, "Of course we can." What you do is you take a very large sandbox. You erect a transparent screen behind the sandbox onto which you project the slide of the sea. And then you take the girl and the model, you put her in the middle of the sandbox, and you shine a strong spotlight on her. and basically 95%, you would get a 95% picture similar to what you would get at the Bahamas. That 5% only for professionals can tell the difference. People are fooled very easily.
Oh yeah.
One of the main problems with that sandbox is that the sandbox has a continued horizontal line going all across the picture, because your sand ends at some point and the screen behind has to start with a picture of the sea. You cannot have a continuity from the sand to the water. You can never have that water actually leak the sand. If you look at that picture, which is just a coincidence, you can see a very straight line going all across the lower third of the picture, where you have the foreground. The sand is much grayer, very moved. That is the actual sand in the studio. What you see behind that line, horizontal line, is actually a front projection or a rear projection, you can have both, of a picture of a mountain somewhere. When I started seeing that, and then I started looking at more and more and more pictures, and since they published them all, I figured out that the 99% of the pictures had the same problem, including a 360 panoramic where this continuous line goes all around, which means that either the astronauts were landed on a cone and the mountains were in the distance, or we're in a studio. So what I did when I saw those pictures, I called my old, mentor, the photographer Toscani. I was still in good terms with him. And I asked him, Oliviero, what did you think when you first saw the Apollo pictures of the moon? And he said, and I quote him, he said, had they given it to me, I would have done a much better job. Okay.
That's a damning statement, isn't it? Damning.
Absolutely. So that tells me that absolutely, that was in my conspiracy mind, which I do have. But in that particular case, no, it was the professional who saw a problem that I myself encountered, and I saw it replicated in the pictures. Then, of course, after that, light lit up in my brain. Then I started looking, and of course, you find more and more problems, shadows that are not correct, and all kind of things that photographers know exactly where to look to find.
Let's start to work through this, because I think it's so fascinating, and I cannot recommend your documentary highly enough. It answered all my questions. So obviously, this is an image here of JFK, and the starting point is the moon race, isn't it, between Russia and the USA? So start us there. Really, what was going on there?
Well, what I believe, this is my conviction. I'm convinced that what I believe is that this is 1961 when Kennedy announced we will land a man on the moon and bring him safely back to Earth by the end of the decade. That famous announcement, he actually meant it, and people at NASA did mean it. The director of NASA, James Webb, had actually convinced Kennedy that they could do it. Yes, Mr. President, if you give me a decade, we can do it. That's him, James Webb. And so I believe that they were sincere, and they tried hardly enough. The program was very, very, very tight schedule, of course, and they tried hard enough until 1966. That's 3 years before the landing. At that point, they had a major accident on the launch pad of Apollo 1. 3 astronauts died, burned alive inside the capsule. They realized the capsule needed to be the capsule, the part that takes the 3 astronauts to the moon, needed to be redesigned completely. That would mean another extra year of work and a lot of problems. I think, again, is my conviction, that at that specific point, they said, you know what, guys, we have simulators now that can simulate every single step of the trip to the moon and back in a studio. Why don't we just use that? Because we can't really face the world and say, oops, sorry, we stress ourselves too much. We cannot actually do this. This is too difficult. And so they went for the studio version, which, again, in my own film, you can see all the simulators they had, including the landing. There's a simulation of when the astronauts try to land their LEM, the lunar module, onto the moon. And you look at the pictures on the screen, and then you look at the pictures of the allegedly real landing, they're practically identical. That means either in a studio they had they had such a good fantasy that they could project exactly how the landing would be, or they used the same images from the simulator and they gave us those pictures as real for the real time. There are many. Photography is not the only problem. After I started looking
Oh
at
yeah, no, we're going to
photography,
start working through them
okay,
because
okay,
obviously your documentary, American Moon, what it does is it poses, is it 42 questions for the disbelievers. And the first one is absolutely spot on because that's the thing most common that I hear a lot of the time, which we'll get to that shortly. So are you saying that this was falsified simply because, well, one, the Americans didn't want to lose face, but there was also, wasn't there, the competing issues between America and the USSR and wanting to be seen as a superpower as well? That was certainly an issue. So, but there is no doubt from your perspective that that was falsified because they were simply unable to do it and they wanted to be seen to beat Russia. Is that accurate?
it is. Except, let me be very honest. I cannot state 100% sure that men never went to the moon. As far
Oh,
as I know, they can even be going back and forth now in 5 minutes with other mediums, though.
right.
Other
That's
mediums.
different, isn't it? That's a whole lot different because this happened in our lifetime. We're still force fed it. And most people can't even get like a clear line from one room to the next, right? They cannot fathom how in 1969 that was achievable with that kind of machinery. And machinery looks like it's held together with sticky back plastic, right? And cereal boxes. It looks pathetic, doesn't it?
It, it,
It does, doesn't it? Let's start working through that. The first thing that I hear is about the Van Allen belt. People talk about that a lot. Talk to us, Massimo.
well, that seems to be, again, is something that cannot be proven absolutely, that you cannot go through them because of their radiation. Van Allen belts are two radiation belts that start from the North Pole and surround the Earth and end in the South Pole. And this is like a big donut that actually protects us from cosmic radiation because it captures most of them. But of course, it's like hell in there because imagine you capture all the lions that come from the forest to your house, and they're all in a cage, and you actually want to go across that cage. It's not very healthy to begin with. Okay, so again, this is one point that cannot be proven because nobody can actually go out and say, "Oh, look, I died."
Right, right,
That you can't
right.
do it. But again, common sense says that it's impossible. And the problems that they're having today in quote unquote returning to the moon, it actually tells me that that problem has not been solved yet. The radiation, when Van Allen, they're called Van Allen because a scientist named Van Allen discovered them in 58 or 57. He stated first, it's absolutely impossible for human to even think to go through them unless you go through the poles because there's no radiation there, but you can't go through the poles because the moon is on the ellipse, on the equatorial orbit. So you cannot just go out and then make a turn to the right like you would do with a car. Once you shoot out, that's your direction. So he said, it's absolutely impossible unless we can find a system for them. Obviously, once they went to the moon in 69, Van Allen was forced to walk back what he said, but what he said originally is what matters, of course. It's like Galileo. Galileo initially said, look, this thing is moving. Then they forced him to say, no, it's not. But of course, we know that the first answer is the good one. That remains a problem, I believe still today. It's a big problem because radiations, not only do you have the problem of crossing the Van Allen belts, but then you're out exposed to the cosmic radiation. And again, let
Right.
me loop back to the photography because in this case it's very important. If there is one argument that's impossible to destroy about not having gone to the moon, is that the all the 6,000 pictures that were taken out on the moon allegedly do not carry a single sign of radiation on the film. I, as a photographer and as an assistant, I learned my lesson the hard way. And I know what happens when you, by mistake, put film through the X-ray machine of an airport. I made that mistake once, and I will never forget what happened. Practically all the pictures were destroyed. And that was 1 second of
Oh, that's
X-ray.
an excellent point, actually. That is
Oh,
an
and the
excellent, yes.
astronauts are out on the surface of the moon, even for 8 consecutive hours. The camera has no protection whatsoever because it's impossible to protect from radiation. And the film is in there, and the film is perfectly clean. There's not one single damage from radiation. And this is absolutely impossible to people who maintain that we went to the moon, the debunkers, they have tried to explain that, but there's absolutely no way you can explain that logically. The very fact that the film has no uh, radiation damage on it tells me with absolute certainty that that film has never been outside the Van Allen belts.
Interesting. And also, what's interesting, of course, is given what they already would have known about the Allen belt, NASA apparently sent these astronauts fairly unequipped for the expedition, weren't they? They were not really protected.
I'm telling you, we knew about the problem because Van Allen said it's a problem. Okay, once you send out these astronauts, you would at least expect them. The first mission officially went out is Apollo 8, that circumnavigated the moon and came back a year before Apollo 11. Once you get out there, you would expect at least the astronauts, when they reach close to them, to kind of talk about it, to say, "Are you guys feeling anything funny? I don't see anything in my eyes yet. How about you?" There is not one trace of one conversation, either between the astronauts or between the astronauts and Earth, about crossing the Van Allen belt the first time in history. I mean, it's like Columbus going over the other side of the world and he's communicating,
Right.
and he says, "Oh, the birds are beautiful here. By the way, you went across the world. Do you have anything to say about it?" No, obviously not, because in my opinion, and in most researchers' opinion, they never went out of the Van Allen belts. They stayed in orbit for 7 days. They grew their beard nicely, and then they came back after circulating the Earth for 7 days. That's exactly how they did it, in my opinion.
I think another question that I think is, it's so obvious, and yet I think it's missed a lot of the time. And that is, there was clearly none of the regular movement that you would expect in the picture. So, for example, the movement of sand, the movement of pebbles. And there was a distinct lack of that, wasn't there?
It was actually more than that. It's being that we are on the moon and supposedly there is no atmosphere there. When the rover, the land rover, the jeep that they had goes very fast and lifts a plume of sand in the back, that sand is supposed to be should be ejected and fall straight forward without making any dust clouds, because there's no air. It does create clouds. The dust from the moon remains suspended in the air, exactly as if we were in a studio. That's another big telltale, another big sign that we are in the presence of atmosphere. We're not in the vacuum. In the vacuum, the sand would be ejected from the wheel that's rotating, would be ejected in a straight line and fall like a bullet, basically, with an arch. Instead, if you look carefully at the famous, they call it the Grand Prix, when they drive around the lunar rover, and then they pretend to make a counter steering, then they play like they're on the sand, and they shoot up the sand, and you see these little clouds that they should not be happening if we were really on the moon.
Exactly. And also the absence of the sound of an engine when they were restarting as well. You can hear music, but not an engine, right? That in itself should be some red flags for people.
The departure engine, it's inside the lunar module. It's not outside. It's not attached outside. It's inside. It's like I'm sitting on a chair here. They're actually sitting on the engine. The microphone is here. This engine is supposedly pushing the whole thing back up to the Earth. There's absolutely no sound whatsoever. And let me tell you something else about sound, missing sound, that's very important to me. Astronauts when they're on the surface of the moon, they wear what is called a PLSS, Portable Life Support System. That machine allows them to survive for 8 full hours out on the lunar surface, and it provides for cooling system, because it's 120 degrees Celsius. I don't know if in England if you use Celsius or what do you use, but anyway, 100 degrees, very, very hot. Let's put it above boiling temperature of boiling water. Okay, so they have a cooling system inside. We'll have a net of little liquid that goes all over their inside, and of course they have a pump that needs to pump this water and recycle it and refresh you. Also, they have a second pump that's supposed to pump your oxygen for you to breathe. This whole system is connected. Of course, you're connected to the PLSS, and there's at least 2 big pumps going on. And when they talk, there's absolutely no sound. You would expect to hear a this kind of noise in the background when they talk to each other. There's absolutely nothing. So either they invented the most silent pumps in the universe, but they never replicated them for us to have, or they're not using them and it's all fake.
And also at that point, you raise another interesting issue, and that is given, excuse me, the importance of this mission, just the idea that they're playing music as well, kind of, it almost creates as if it's not important at all. It's like, they're just driving down the motorway, really. And even though it's small, it still adds, doesn't it, to the kind of bank of evidence that there's a problem.
Well, when they lift off, I think it's Apollo 15, somebody puts on a music, like a background music, to make it more, it's like Hollywood.
Exactly
I mean, who even have the time to think about, let alone the fact that this can disturb your conversations, because you need to be talking very clearly to your companion. There's no room for extra sounds there. But who even thinks of turning off a music when you're actually starting off a rocket from the moon, and you only have one chance to get out of there,
and the whole world is watching you,
and the whole world is watching. And oh, by the way, before we go, Johnny, how about some music?
Right.
Let's go.
Right.
I mean, it's so Hollywood. It's so Hollywood.
It's very Hollywood, isn't it? Excuse me. And you also, obviously, the issue of like that there's no moisture on the moon, and yet there was sand sticking to them as well. That, again, another clear telltale sign that there's a problem, right?
There's big chunks of sand. We're not talking about a thin veil of dust that could maybe attach to the equipment because of electrostatic mechanism. This is big chunks of mud. Of course, one says, why would they need to wet the mud? Because they need to give the impression that there is no atmosphere. So for them to have no dust when they move, they probably had to wet the sand a little bit. I used to race motocross in my youth. And before every race in summer, because to avoid the clouds of dust, they would go around the track and wet it with a special liquid, which was mixed of water and oil that would make the sand heavier. And so when we race, we wouldn't have all this dust of a cloud of dust. But again, when you wet it and then you actually lift and move that sticks everywhere, and it's really everywhere on the wheels, on the camera lens. You have big chunks of mud attached to the camera lens, and they stick there. How can they stick if there is no atmosphere? That's impossible to explain also.
It's so fascinating. We won't necessarily be able to cover everything, which is more's the pity. We've still got time to carry on, though, because I think the issues that you raise will, I think, prick the conscience of even the most diehard supporters of this narrative. And oh, really? Have you not found that? Because this was 2018 when you released that documentary. Really? Go on.
Most people who are in between, yes, they might fall over the side of no, we never went. But there's some diehard debunkers. They would go to any extreme to explain and to answer all of my questions. I mean, if you listen to them, every question has an answer. You don't want to hear those answers because you want to remain in a logical system of thinking. But they do have an answer for everything. I mean, I'm not even going to start to tell you what they are.
I know, absolutely. But there's so many issues. Like there's this light, right? I think it's flashes of light that occurs. What was that all about? And you asked that at question 21.
Right above. Well, the idea is that in order to fake the 1/6 gravity, they used cables like they use in regular movies, and the suspension cables that are attached to the back. And they're black, of course, and they're not supposed to shine any light back, except sometimes they do. Sometimes even a darkened cable will have a little flash of light in a studio. What you see is in a couple of instances, the astronauts are jumping around, and right above their head, a couple of meters above, so way above their antenna, you see this flash of light, which is exactly above their head. That, again, cannot be explained. You know how the debunkers explain that? Oh, it's a bad spot in the film, which actually happens right above their head. It doesn't happen anywhere else on the screen except right above the helmet of the. Yeah, that's a telltale that they're using cables also.
Let me go to the comments, ask you some questions. Sky High says, what about moon waves?
What about them? I'm sorry, but I don't know what he's talking about.
I don't know either. That's literally it. Just what about moon waves? Right. Well, we'll return to that. If you want to give us a little bit more information on that. Gavaldo says Capricorn 1 movie is basically a true story. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Capricorn 1 was a very courageous movie that was made only 4 years after the moon landings, the 1974. Of course, they don't tell you we never went to the moon. They use an identical setup, and they narrate how they faked a trip to Mars. But of course, the lamb is exactly the same, and the whole story is exactly the same. And the idea that the moon landings were faked was actually injected in the public discourse by that movie.
Yes.
And I love when people say, "Oh, it would be much more expensive to reproduce the moon landings in the studio than going for real." That's one of their reasonings. Actually, that film cost $4 million, so it was extremely cheap to make, and it looks exactly like the pictures of the moon.
Right. Amy asks a good question. Why did the Russians not expose the lie?
This is not only a good question, I would say this is the one most important, the most logical, the most legitimate question that anybody should ask when when wondering about the moon landings. My answer is that it's multifaceted. There's more than one reason. Number one, imagine you're the one who just lost the moon race. Okay, you're not a third party. You are the person who actually lost. And we all, quote unquote, we've all seen it on TV. And what the Russians do come out and say, oh, it was fake. That would look like the sore losers that first of all. But there's a much more important reason behind. There were a lot of economic agreements going on behind closed doors between the Soviet Union and the States at the time.
Right.
And in particular, there was already a joint program that would bring us in 1975 to the Apollo-Soyuz meeting in space. The two capsules, the Soviet one and the American one, joined in space in the Apollo-Soyuz program. That was in 75, but that was already, the plans were already rolling as the Apollo missions were going. For the Russians to call that a bluff, it would have basically meant the end of all cooperations with the Americans, in which they were actually getting a lot of technology from the United States. You had American astronauts visiting the Cosmodrome. The Russian astronauts were visiting the Houston launch place. They were exchanging a lot of scientific information. It was in both interests not to reveal the fakery, and they would have looked like stupid losers anyway. So
I get that, and that hits my solar plexus, as that makes a lot of sense. And MK Leggy says Russia and USA both worked together. There was no moon race, so the idea of a moon race, that was kind of like falsified for
it was the hype. Right. It was the hype that was built, was injected into the American public in order to justify the expense, because the expense was very high. And many people say, why? I mean, we have Vietnam, we have a lot of problems at home. We have 1968, we had Kennedy killed, Robert Kennedy just killed. Right. Why do we spend so much money to go to the moon? We have all the problems here. So to answer that, it was very important to inject the idea of the moon race, and we have to win, and we have to show the world that we are the technologically most advanced and all that. So yes, absolutely. That must have been a good reason.
Yes, indeed. Ange said, Sonia, please ask Massimo how rockets propel themselves in a vacuum. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense, except I cannot answer the question technically. I'm not scientifically prepared to do, but I know that there's a huge discussion, about the propulsion and the fact that in the vacuum, the rocket should not work at all. I cannot answer either way, but I acknowledge that there is a big discussion there. I tend to believe that because of the system of, it's actually a reaction. It's not an action against the vacuum, but it's a reaction. So I still think that it works, but I cannot prove that either way or either way. And it is a big argument. It comes up every time we discuss the moon landings on my website. There's always someone that says, how do the rockets work in vacuum? I don't have the answer for you. I'm sorry. A definite answer.
Well, and thank you for being honest about that. User says, was it Stanley Kubrick's best film? That people have often said that Kubrick was involved, haven't they?
It is. It is one of the arguments that finds me at odds, let's say, with the community of the moon hoax. I don't believe it was necessary to bother someone like Kubrick to do, let me say, such a shitty job. It is a terrible job, photographically speaking. It is not necessary to go and wake up somebody like Kubrick to do that. Any average photographer in a Disney studio, for example, and I'm not saying Disney by chance, because it was a very tight connection between Walt Disney and Werner von Braun. Any average photographer could have done that job the way it was done. Again, when my photographer mentor told me I could have done a much better job, that's exactly what he meant. I don't believe. I believe that Kubrick was aware. Of course, he had contacts with high levels at NASA. They have given him a special lens. There's a whole story about the special lens that they've given him, and all. Yes, but I don't think that. And he puts a lot of innuendos in the movie The Shining. But it's not to tell them that he did it. It's to tell the world that we didn't go.
I
but
got
not
you.
necessarily that
Got
he did
you.
that.
Got you. Derek in the comments saying, ask about the Van Allen belt. I think you might have joined late, Derek, because we had quite a big, Massimo gave us quite a lot of information about the Van Allen belt right at the start of this conversation. So do go back and check that out. People talk about how they can see the backdrop in the pictures. And what else? The man in the moon filmed the landing and taking off. So that's the other thing, is the complicity of it. Would this have involved a lot of people being complicit in what was taking place?
That is the second most legitimate question that anybody who is wondering about the moon landings may ask. And it's, again, I address both of these questions in depth in my film. I'm just going to be very, very short here. It's not true that so many people would have to be involved. When they say, 400,000 people were involved in the NASA project, how could you have so many people keep the secret for so long and nobody ever speak? The first ones to be fooled are the people who are sitting in the actual launch room, the control room that you see in the films, in the old films, when they actually watch the moon landing and they all get up and wave their little flags and they start their cigars. When you actually could smoke inside, they all puff their cigars and everything. Those NASA employees, I believe, are the first ones to be fooled. In other words, all you need to fool these people is a very tight crew, to film the land, to film the moonwalks separately, and then somebody to simply broadcast those images to the very NASA people who would be the first one to cheer because they think that we went to the moon. But all you need to do is pre-record those images and either broadcast them from a satellite in orbit, so the actual signal is coming from the direction of the moon, or some other gimmick that they could figure out. But what you see on that screen in the control room and everybody cheering, those people are the first ones to getting fooled by NASA itself. All it takes is about maybe 30, 40 people in the know to keep this under wraps. And I believe that's not that difficult to do.
And many of them will already be dead by now, won't they? And there's and I deal a lot with corruption anyway, and how people keep secrets within big organizations and government establishments. So there is a comment here which was saying that a lot of the NASA people were duped as well. People are also talking to me in the comments about Elon Musk. Any thoughts about Elon Musk and Mars and space travel? Did you just raise your eyes to heaven there? Because if so, me and you are definitely on the same page.
I think that the man is a joke. I think the man is a joke. It's the richest man on earth, but it's still a joke. When he says we're going to Mars and we're going this. Oh, by the way, he said, because he probably knows about the problems, we might as well skip the moon. There's no need to go back to the moon. Let's go straight to Mars. It's just done. Been there, done it. Been there, done that. So why go back? He said at some point. Of course, there's a big competition between SpaceX and then the other one, which I don't remember the name. Now that the private sector is involved, of course, all kinds of interest. But
absolutely,
the way he does things, it just makes it look so easy. He should explain. He should be the one to explain why we can't even go back to the moon now. Artemis 1 was supposed to go back in 2014 the first time. then it was pushed back. I mean, still with Obama, I remember we are going back to the moon. Okay, Bush started in 2004, the new program, Artemis. Then Obama was supposed to go back to the moon. He didn't make it. Then Trump came, and Trump won, in Trump 45, was supposed to go in between 16 and 2020. In 4 years, they kept delaying. Then Biden came and says, I'm going to be the one who we go back to the moon. Another 4 years of delay. Now we're back with Trump again, and again delays. We've only sent out Artemis 1. Artemis 2 has been pushed back to next year, and Artemis 3, which is the actual landing that's planned, has been pushed indefinitely beyond 2027. So somebody, maybe Elon Musk, could explain why in 1968, starting from zero, because we started from scratch in 1961, in 8 years, 1969, we actually managed to go to the moon 6 times. And now in 25 years, with all the technology that we have today,
wild,
we can go back.
Wild.
I mean, that in itself should raise more than an eyebrow.
It does raise more than an eyebrow, because the kind of world we live in, where everything gets monetized, we really should be having day trips now, shouldn't we, to the moon, given, what we've apparently done in 1969. And also, this is interesting what Colin Guthrie says, and that is the demeanor of the astronauts at the following press conference was a giveaway. Did you ever, I can't remember if it was Buzz Aldrin. Do you remember, who was it? Bart Sibbel, wasn't it, who handed him a Bible? Did you see that? He wanted him to swear on the Bible, right, that they'd been. Do you know what I'm talking about, Massimo?
Not only did I see that, that's the last chapter of my film. I used Bart Sibrel's images of him chasing all the astronauts of Apollo 11, and all of them refusing to swear that they have been on the moon.
Absolutely.
And Armstrong even refuses $5 in charity, $5,000 in charity. Says, if you swear on the Bible, I have $5,000 here. You can give it to charity to anybody. He says, no, I won't sign. I won't swear. Why? Why not? Because I won't. As simple as that. Obviously, they know one thing very importantly. In the United States, if you swear on the Bible in your own camera, then you can actually be taken to court for lying by swearing on the Bible. So the fact that he has both the Bible and the camera on,
right,
probably scared them to the point that they just run away. They run away like little rabbits. It's really awful. In my opinion, I have to say, I feel sorry for these 12 people who were forced to lie for all their life. They cannot in any way admit what really happened, and they have to take that secret to the grave, because astronauts are originally very courageous people, very brave people, and I don't want to have to think what I had to go through when they were told, we're not going to make it, but we're going to have to fake it. And that must have been the most awful sensation for any of those guys. So I feel sorry for them in a way. I don't blame them for lying to the world. They simply had to. This one big secret you cannot give away.
Yeah, we don't know what pressures they were dealing with in the background, or how they were compromised, or any of those things. Although I did notice there's a news story yesterday in the press about Buzz Aldrin now confined to living in a small space, hardly any money, life falling apart, people assuming that he will be dead soon. And I think those things are interesting. But listen, Massimo, you've been a terrific guest, absolutely terrific. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. Before you leave us today, what do you think is like the ultimate red flag that somebody who denies what you are saying should be aware of?
About the moon landing, you mean? As I said, find me a trace of radiation damage on the film, and I will change my mind. There is none. And that is absolutely impossible. I know by personal experience what happens when you expose film to radiation. And I'm talking only X-rays, my experience. Out there, there's X-rays, gamma rays, alpha rays. I mean, that film should have been obliterated. You would have been able to barely see something, if anything at all. And those pictures are perfectly sharp, perfectly neutral in color. The blacks are blacks. I mean, you would love to get something like that in a studio, let alone on the moon.
Indeed. And I want to say a big shout out to Priscilla, who supports Wake Up and suggested Massimo as a guest. Great choice, sister. Fantastic. Massimo, we are going to haul you back to talk about marijuana, and because you are an absolute tonic to listen to. I mean, I think what I've really enjoyed about hearing you talk is that there's no airs or graces about what you're saying. It's just very straightforward, very factual, and what's not to love about that? Everybody, this is Massimo Mazzucco, and he is one to absolutely watch. I will put a link in the description to his documentary. Take good care of yourself, Massimo. Have a lovely week. Wonderful to have you.
Bye bye. Ciao, Priscilla.
Bye. Wonderful, wonderful indeed.